What would you say are the myths about divorce? What are wrong beliefs that people have?
Oh, that divorce is wrong somehow? That there's something either morally or religiously wrong, or that it's a failure of some sort, that you failed in your marriage. In fact, you probably tried for a long time to make it work, but it's not a failure if that doesn't happen. And sometimes a divorce is the best thing that could ever happen to you. A lot of people think it's like, oh my God, it's the end of the world. It's the end of the world if I lose this marriage. But it's not. It can actually be the beginning of a whole new life, right? A whole new perspective and a catalyst for level of personal development and newfound freedom for women to actually like to be who maybe they're hiding a lot of themselves in the marriage, which happens a lot, right? Or they don't have time or energy. They're just completely consumed by their responsibilities and looking after their husband, because a shockingly high number of husbands are showing up like an extra child in their marriage. And so women can get, I read a study recently that a husband adds to a woman's weekly workload 7 hours. That doesn't count what the kids are doing, right? So, I think it's very challenging. It's very painful. It's very challenging. And the first, like getting through the actual process in the first few years can be pretty rough. But after that, if you can stay grounded, and get the healing work done that you need to do so you don't stay stuck in your trauma, right? It's essential to do healing work specifically and not just say, that's another myth, is that time is going to heal the wound. Time doesn't really heal the wound, especially not trauma wounds. Trauma stays and gets worse over time. If the trauma is still in there and is still being triggered, every re-traumatization drives the pattern deeper. So time does not heal that wound. You have to actively work towards your healing and resolving your trauma from that relationship. Really important. Which usually involves also going back to your childhood and resolving the traumas from your childhood that led you to be attracted to this person in the first place, right?
What you just said sparked something I heard recently. A doctor said that the stress level that you experience either as a child or during relationships in terms of trauma increases or decreases your level of bearing stress just in general. You are not very stress resistant then. And because you said time will not heal the wounds, as we oftentimes hear from grandparents, right, who mean it well, but if you don't actually actively take care of yourself during that healing time, time has no impact on your relationship or with the relationship that you have with yourself. I think there needs to be an effort made during a time span so that you can heal the trauma and become more stress resistant. Because when you already have a low level of stress resistance built up during childhood or early relationships that include massive abuse, you will not be able to go through any type of relationship, not with yourself, not with your kids, also not with your partner, because that will, as you said, trigger all the time. And as you said, I also believe that it will get worse because you don't really take care of the triggers. You don't know how to manage the triggers or to avoid them, right? There are some that you can avoid and some that you need to manage in a way.
And the other, like when you're talking about stress resistance, people might not know what that really means, but what it is capacity in the nervous system. You've probably heard the phrase a zone of tolerance. So if I say this between my hands is the zone of tolerance for how much stress someone can handle, right? And if they have like a perfectly wonderful childhood, there was no birth trauma, and their parents are all wonderful and loving, and they weren't bullied, and blah, 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 like maybe they go into adulthood with this like nice, big, generous zone of tolerance, because our nervous system activation, like we need our sympathetic activation response to come alive, just to get out of bed and to get to work, right? Or whatever it is, like we have to have a sympathetic activation, but that's also fight or flight. People call it fight or flight, but in normal situations, it's just enough activation to get going. And then it comes down on the other side in the parasympathetic response, which is the rest and digest, right? And we're meant to have a flow throughout our day of our nervous system activation well within the zone of tolerance, right? It should be just kind of floating along in here. However, the more stress you have in your life, and it doesn't have to be relationship stress. It can be, you know, like that, one of your parents dying. It could be getting, into a motor vehicle accident. It could be a surgery that you had, or maybe you have type 1 diabetes, like whatever it is that's going on in your life. Every stressor that adds up, if it's not really resolved with the proper healing work, your zone of tolerance gets smaller. So it takes less and less activation in your nervous system to tip you up above the zone of tolerance. And as soon as you're above the zone of tolerance, you're in a trauma response now. A trauma response is distinct from a stress response, which is fight or flight. The trauma response is when you go into freeze, collapse, right? And sometimes the trauma response can include fawn. It's like freeze, fawn, and another common one is attach and cry for help, right? And just like collapse. And then people end up with because they exceeded their zone of tolerance, now their nervous system is dysregulated and it's going up wildly. So they're going through like chronic extreme anxiety, crashing down into total collapse, also known as functional freeze. And people can get stuck in functional freeze for years. And that's basically the definition of depression. Functional freeze. You can't, you're like, I'm stuck in mud. I can't, it's hard to think. I have no motivation. I can't get out of bed. I can't stay focused on anything. I can't make decisions. I can't do hard things. Like functional freeze. It's bad. So people can get stuck there for years. They can still kind of sleepwalk through life, but they're not really alive. Like they're not really living. They're existing. That can happen, and people can be stuck there for years. Yeah, that happens a lot.
I believe that, let's say, a woman that goes through that type of stress and abuse and what have you, and and the stress level lowers, the tolerance for stress lowers with every new partner that she chooses. If she's not addressing that type of stress, I believe she could choose a good man, good, whatever that means, but she will still perceive him as bad because her tolerance for stress is so low. And I think this is also a tendency that is happening right now, as women have been collectively and over generations gone through a lot of trauma and abuse in terms of relationships and marriage, that now women perceive even good men, would have been described as good men maybe 50 years ago, now are seen as bad men, or those that would harm a woman. Yeah.
Or at least just a threat. Like there's a perception of threat, because the amygdala is turned on. Whether that person is a threat or not, they can still be, like if your amygdala, your danger perception center that gets totally triggered by like your stress response and your trauma response, you're just scanning the environment and you're like, we're all on the hunt for red flags now, aren't we? It's not the hunt for red October, it's the hunt for red flags. We're just, just constantly like, is that a red flag? And then as soon as that women see a red flag now, they're just going zing, like just, press the eject button, boosh, gone. And we're doing it to protect ourselves, and I think it's fair. Until you're healed, don't get into a new relationship. I made that mistake myself not that long ago, and I just couldn't actually handle the relationship because my trauma from my marriage and divorce was still, even though I'd been working on it, it was intense. And there was other intense trauma and stress as well in my life that was not that, but it all accumulates. It doesn't matter the source of the trauma and stress. It's just all accumulates. It doesn't matter what bucket it's in. It's just all one big pit, right? Of activated neurons.
Would you say there are self-limiting beliefs that women have that are kind of holding them back from either divorce or either staying in the relationship or working on the relationship, aka working on the relationship they have with themselves or resolving that type of trauma?
I think one of the biggest limiting beliefs that women have is that they can't do it alone, that they're not going to be okay on their own, that they quote unquote need a man. That can be a problem. In terms of leaving, they're afraid to be alone. They're afraid to be alone, and they are afraid they're not going to be able to find love again. We even though we can be okay alone, it's nice to have still like companionship and like a lover in your life. So do we have to deny ourselves that the rest of our lives? There's a lot to think about that, but they may not feel worthy of ever having love again. They may not feel capable of doing all of those things that we have relied on men to look after us for, whether it's like the oil change or the yard work or, repairs around the house, like all those kind of things that can be pretty overwhelming. But the women I've worked with, what we've certainly noticed is so many women, it's like they get actually this big dopamine rush that they get when they actually have to tackle something and learn it. Like, oh my God, I fixed my dryer. Like whatever it is, when they actually like, look what I did. I made this, I made these shelves in my living room, or holy smokes, check it out. I did this here. I made these gardens by myself. And then like, I have a divorce support group online, for example, and we congratulate and celebrate these wins where we're actually like learning how to do things that we just let the men do. And if you need to hire a plumber or something, go ahead. That's okay. Yeah.
I think that also goes both ways, that the tendency is to use the partner for tasks or things that you think you cannot do yourself.
Sure, like men might think, oh my God, how am I going to feed myself or whatever, right? Like, I don't know if I can look after the house or whatever. Like, they could feel quite lost that way and overwhelmed.
And this is a type of dependency, right? If you entered into a relationship because you don't want to do certain things yourself, or you think he can do that, right? Then I don't have to do it. It's kind of a dependency mindset, isn't it?
I think it's actually great to have interdependence. Like there's a difference between dependence and codependence, which is a very unhealthy situation where you have no boundaries and you don't value yourself, right? Codependence, and you're letting your partner walk all over you and you don't have a voice and all that stuff. That's, codependency. That's a whole different ballgame. But interdependence is the nature of human evolution and society forever, right? I mean, we can't, like, none of us is an island on this planet. We are all depending on each other, right? What would we do, if the farmers decided to just pack it in, right? Like we are interdependent as a species. And I see nothing wrong with having divisions of labor and people symbiotically contributing to the running of like their life support system in their home and their business and, all of those things that they need. I don't see a problem with that. It's just that if you start to develop the mindset that that you're not capable of doing those other things, and it's true that lack of exposure to certain tasks and all of the gender stereotypes about what the men are good at and what the women are good at can make people feeling less competent and more overwhelmed going forward into a divorce or a separation. I think it contributes to the sense of overwhelm. If it's like, oh my God, now I have to look after all of this. I have found it challenging to look after things like getting my snow tires on and, like just keeping up with vehicle maintenance, and the yard work just goes to heck and all that stuff. And I just have to prioritize and just like deal. Just got to deal. We can do hard things is like an important thing to learn. We can do it. And so you can actually develop a lot of confidence and an expansion of your comfort zone, which is how you grow. It's growth. A divorce brings growth. It brings pain, but it brings growth. And especially if you're going to take a growth mindset specifically, like this is an opportunity for me to change my life. Things weren't perfect in my life before. Something in me, like it takes two. It can be like an abuse situation, that's different, but in like a sort of a typical divorce situation where it's just like the communication fell down and people lost connection and I kind of lost my train of thought. Sorry. Pick up the ball there. What kind of direction were we going here at this moment? Growth mindset. Like I can learn to do hard things and I can change my relationship patterns. I can change my pattern of clamming up instead of speaking my needs, right? Like that happens in a lot of relationships. People don't feel safe, for example, to express their needs. And that again, though, comes down to the nervous system activation. If you're not feeling safe, it might have nothing to do with your husband. It could have everything to do with your father, for example. And then you're not clearly expressing a need. And then your partner's like going, why do you expect me to read your mind? I can't. And that, you know, we get into those kinds of communication breakdowns when people are afraid to speak their minds because they got shut down as kids. Or they have a feeling that they're not allowed to have needs, or that they're like so many women, we are socialized to give and give and give. We're socialized to sacrifice. We're socialized to just kind of like work on helping everybody else, even to the point of ourselves getting nothing out of the situation. Like, you know, to be that kind of martyr mother and get a lot of sort of like spiritual gratification and maybe social accolades for doing that, when it's really just kind of bullshit.
I almost chose a bad word, but it's generational conditioning of women, I believe, over multiple centuries, how you consider, for example, what a good mother is or what a good wife is. And it is always attributed to what she does, not how she is, right? While with a man, I think it's different. You consider a good husband based on how he is, right? Not necessarily what he does. Also, of course, the financial part and the protector part, provider part.
And the repairman, and, you know, oftentimes like a babysitter, which they should actually be just parenting their kids, not babysitting them. But, you know, I think we do, men also feel quite like that their value is attached to what they're doing, their career and their social function of being of value somehow. So I think overall in humanity, we have this focus on human doing versus human being, right? So adopting an attitude of mattering how I'm being more so than what I'm doing is a big shift for people.
And when a woman decides now to divorce because the relationship is just not going in the right direction, or it has taken an abusive road even, what are the common emotions that you see that they are going through on a daily basis?
There's a couple of stages of this, because before, like, they have to make this decision a lot of the time, and because it is most women making the decision, because women are looking for more than what men are looking for. In a way, women are looking for, I think, a higher degree of emotional connection. Some men might be dissatisfied as she's being good enough, and they're not maybe quite as demanding for what they're looking for from that relationship. They're dissatisfied, and the women might be more dissatisfied. But in terms of coming up with that decision, and depending on whether or not there's abuse, like there could be a lot of like just discontentment, frustration, aggravation, confusion, overwhelm, and she's trying to figure out, what am I going to do about this marriage? And feeling like, and there's a really good coach, Sharon Pope, who talks about this aspect, because women think they have a choice between leaving and staying in the crappy marriage. And she says, no. The third road is what you need to do. You need to see if you can shift the marriage by, guess what? Showing up differently yourself. Show up differently and see if you can shift it. Can you evolve your marriage to like this marriage 2.0? By showing up in a more assertive way, by showing up in a more open way, by maybe showing up in a more loving way, maybe by paying more attention to what you know your partner's love languages are, and showing up in ways where you're giving the way that you want to be given to, so that you're moving the needle forward and you're trying to break through boundaries, right? Like, you can change the marriage, and if you at least try that and give it a good effort, when you finally do, if you do finally decide to leave, at least you know that you tried. So you don't have all that second guessing and doubting and all this kind of stuff. It's like, no, I went through this. I tried to change it. I did everything I could. It's still like he had no interest. It just wasn't going anywhere. Now I can make the decision to leave, file, whatever it is, with a clear conscience and the feeling inside, like without regret, like the feeling inside that I did what I could. So when she leaves, assuming this is what she chooses, it depends on the situation. When I left my marriage, it was in a blind panic. It was like I felt, it was just like, I was just completely traumatized. It was like a nervous breakdown sort of scenario. We were all spiraling, like, and just off our rockers. So that was just like a complete trauma response, panic mode, freak out. So some people are in that state. Other people are, there's the big ones are fear, terror, right? Like, oh my God, I'm all out on my own. How am I going to do this? And how am I going to afford it? And like to have, like, that's a big fear, of course, is the financial fears. They could be in a state of rage. I was in a state of rage, and a lot of women are in a state of rage because, well, they found out that their husband was having an affair, maybe multiple affairs. Who knows? The stories I've heard are crazy, or they could be abused and they're literally running for their life. They're in total state of terror, and then there's the more sort of like garden variety, like intense grief and despair, right? And anxiety and overwhelm. It's like, if you were in trauma response, it's like I felt like I had a head injury for a couple of years. I seriously felt like someone had come and like punched me in the head really hard. I couldn't even read. Like I could read a little bit, like I could read on my screen, but to pick up a book and read it, no. I still have a bit of problem with that because my brain got untrained from reading books. It's harder for me now. I used to read I could speed read 3 to 4 full-length books a week, even in the context of, I used to be a literary publicist, right? So I was very like, I could just, now it's like, okay, I'm going to try to get through a page. Like there's serious brain damage actually that can happen. Brain damage from the trauma, and it rewires your brain, and it just takes your prefrontal cortex right offline. So you could be dealing with a lot of confusion and having a really hard time with your ability to focus. You could total loss, total wreck at work, right? Like not even like comprehension problems, trying to like listen and actually hear what someone's saying. Like your language process centers get thrown offline. Your memory, like your short-term memory parts of your brain get shut down when you're in a trauma response. So all of that is going on. So your brain function is compromised, and here you are trying to navigate a brand new situation. It can feel pretty overwhelming, which is even just more trauma. Overwhelm, right, is the trauma response. So it's a lot that women are going through. And then there could be jealousy, if he's with another woman. Anxiety, despair, grief. Those are the biggies. And a broken heart. Grief. And it's funny because it tends not to get talked about as much for whatever reason in divorce world, but it's a loss. It's like a death. It's a death on many levels. It's the death of that relationship. It's the death of your connection to that person. They may be out of your life now, and all the dreams that you had for your life, your dreams of the retirement that you thought you were going to have, like, sitting on the porch, watching your grandchildren and all that stuff you thought you'd be doing with your husband, and all the things you had planned and saved for and built for, and it's all gone. A lot of women are watching another woman living the life that was supposed to be theirs on their boat, in their cottage, taking the trips that they were supposed to be on, that they planned, right? Like that happens a lot. And then those women are just, fury is an understatement. Devastated, gutted, right? It's devastating. Devastated is how women feel. Yeah, I'm sure men feel devastated too. Depends on the situation, right? It just depends. I'm not saying that it's not hard for men. It varies by the situation, right? It's funny because you know what? I hear men online saying that women, it just seems like she's like right away, look how hot she looks now. Women just seem to pick up and carry on, no problem. And I do think that women do recover better a bit more because women will come together with other women and they'll support each other through it. Men don't tend to gravitate to other men to support each other through emotional crises, but women do. We have the sisterhood. The sisterhood is powerful. Like I lean into the sisterhood as a guiding force and principle. Women have each other. We have each other's backs, except for the bitch that was, with your husband, right? That's a bit different. But those women are different. But the sisterhood, we're pretty anchored with each other and we support each other. And women are more likely to do therapy. They're just more likely to do therapy than men. So I think that actually women probably recover faster. I just think that men might be pretending better. Because they're more adept at masking with stoicism. Right? They've been learned from they've been taught, they've been conditioned to not show grief, to not feel it, to not, have tender emotions. So they would like armor up, and try to get through with stoicism. And nothing wrong with stoicism. Women need to have stoicism as well.
Or maybe they think and take everything that they have gotten as normal and thus not even consider that there can be work done or that things can be improved within themselves, but also in the interplay of a relationship or a future relationship. I think this is also a tendency that men might have, that they are not even considering that there needs to be change done. Like now, when men who are very active on social media, I think they are very conscious now that women are not really putting up with so many things anymore, and they are listening more closely to what women have to say. And on the other hand, it's beautiful to see how some men are really understanding or starting to understand the intricacies that women go through during relationships or during marriages, while on the other hand, we see a different type of extreme where men deny women to have an internal life of its own, right? Or where they think this is not valid, how women feel or how they think, and that this is all crap and we should not listen to it. And so this dynamic is going on, and maybe we should talk about the topic that you mentioned, that you feel women think men are dangerous nowadays.
Well, I mean, the whole, like you mentioned, the would you rather meet a man or a bear in the woods, that whole social media phenomenon from the summer. Women would rather meet a bear, overwhelmingly. Now, having had close encounters with bears, I'm not sure that I feel the same way. But, yeah, well, basically, what I've noticed with the women I've been involved with over the past 5 years as a coach is that, you go through a lot to raise your family and all that you go through as a wife. And then the marriage falls apart and you are building yourself up from ground zero. You're trying to build up your confidence. You're trying to build up your self-esteem. You're trying to build up your finances. You're trying to build up your social connections. You're trying to get healthy. You're trying to do all of these things. And if you are then thinking you want to find a new love in your life, then you have to contend with, a lot of the times it's online dating. And we all know how that one goes. I mean, with the ghosting that happens now and just the shitty dates and the expectations of the way men are with women these days about sex, it's ridiculous. They can be just like, it's just like, what? You haven't, give me a break. If that's what you want for, go hire something maybe, but so then they go through all of this pain. And then maybe they start lowering their standards, maybe because they start to feel like maybe there's nobody there, or maybe they don't even value themselves enough or know what their own standards are because they didn't do the work. They didn't do the work to figure out what they really require in a relationship, to actually feel and connect with and own their own value and worth, to insist on having their needs met, to be able to articulate their needs, and all of these patterns that have to be overcome from the old conditioning of you're meant to sit there, look pretty, and like please the men or whatever the nonsense is. So so many women have then gone on. This happens, a very common pattern. If your marriage was traumatizing and you haven't healed the trauma fully, there is a tendency to get into a subsequent relationship that is even more toxic and traumatizing than the original marriage. And I feel it's because her nervous system set point is that much lower from when she first got married as a young woman. She's been in a relationship that's just slowly torn her down. And now she's down. And so she's perceiving less value in herself. And so she's attracting at a lower attraction point and getting even more traumatized in that next relationship. And this can cost her, for example, like career opportunities, her health, money, like, because dating costs money. Being in a relationship where like suddenly like you're contributing and you're like helping with tickets to go to concerts or whatever, and you're contributing to meals or ingredients and wine and whatever, or you're trying to dress up more and you're getting your manis and petties and you're highlights and your skin treatments or whatever it is to look beautiful. Like I saw one coach a while ago. It was a man. He was saying, ladies, you already contributed to that bill. You spent hundreds of dollars on that just to show up looking beautiful, right? You've already paid. The man can pay the bill for the meal. It cost him nothing. Like right? Like in terms of how he's showing up in his physical appearances. Because women some of them put thousands of dollars, like, I don't even know, like, because I'm not that kind of, I don't do it. I've never had the money or the interest to do all that stuff. But a lot of women do as a routine thing, spend a shit ton of money on their appearance, right? So, because they feel that's how what their value is. And so, yeah, there's a lot of expenses in getting into a relationship, and they can lose their focus on their own dreams. This is what they can get so focused on the man that they're abandoning themselves and they're not pursuing their interests and ambitions and dreams, because now they're going back into lockstep of coming along and supporting a man and being with a man and adjusting, maybe adapting, maybe making themselves a little smaller in whatever way, changing themselves or limiting themselves to be in that relationship. So the opportunity cost can be huge. And in some cases, I have clients who have nearly died from toxic relationships. I have one who ended up in the hospital and with kidney failure and is now needing dialysis. Another one who hasn't worked in more than a year, couldn't get out of bed. Like these relationships, if you get with a narcissist, for example, they're sucking your energy out of you without even trying, right? Like they're just pulling your energy from you, and women can get very sick. I'm not saying men can't, but because I don't work with that population. I'm just talking about my observations. I'm not making comments about what's going on with men. I'm sure that being in a marriage or a relationship with a narcissistic woman is very damaging for men. Or women, like homosexual relationships too, right? So it doesn't matter about that. It's really just if one person's a narcissist. So that can be way worse for your health than you'd ever imagine. People very, very, very sick from it to the point of almost non-functional. Major losses of income. Near loss of life. It's crazy. Yeah. So women are kind of going, I got my peace. I'm by myself. No one is interrupting me. No one is demanding my attention on them. No one's engaging me in an argument. No one's putting me down. No one's expecting me to do stuff for them, serve them in some way. And gosh, this feels good. Women are really kind of like getting into that place now, and they're like, well, I can make my own money. I can do this. And they're not having their peace taken away.
Would you say that in 50 years, we will have any relationships at all based on the tendency or the trajectory that we can see now, that women are divorcing themselves from marriage and relationships, just like men do?
And young women, I know a lot of young women who are just like, not having kids, forget it. Forget it. They're just like not interested at all. Which is interesting, right? So I do think that we are going to be having there are going to be problems actually in our demographics where we're going to have the older population is not going to have enough our tax base of young people who are making money is going to be declining. That's probably why we're going to have robots looking after senior citizens. I mean, who knows? All of that stuff is concerning, right? That stuff is concerning. The potential that I see is I feel that if women just started to value themselves and just called the men to come on up. Stop being such assholes, pardon my language, but can you guys just start to show some respect? Have some respect for yourself, for heaven's sakes. Enough that you can respect me, and they stop giving away the store for crumbs. A lot of women, they've been tolerating crumbs, and for the sake of a relationship for so long because they don't value themselves enough. So I think that as women step into their value, and they are holding on to that, and they're not just letting men in, literally or figuratively, unless the man is meeting her standards. And I say the more women that do that, it's going to call the men to come up. And I see a lot more men talking to men online about this. Come on, guys. And there was the Gottman Institute, study recently, John Gottman reporting on, it's what men do is like 80 to 90% of what's leading to relationship failure is men's behavior. And that's not like, this is a man doing this report. Like, this is not like a women complaining and sitting around over wine going, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's an actual study led by a man saying, men's behavior is the leading predictor of divorce. So I think that if women just kind of, just say, listen, I don't know why you don't respect us. Your mother is a woman, for heaven's sakes. Why are you going to disrespect women? And you may have daughters, and why do you disrespect your wife or your former wife and women that you see on the street? Like the way men talk about women now, it's really quite atrocious and degrading, very degrading. And I feel that they're degrading themselves when they do that, because we're all one. We're not like a separate species, although we sometimes feel like it. We are all one. We're all one. And women have to also give men a bit of space. And, we're tired of raising children, though. Like, we're tired of raising men who are behaving like children. So, and there's so much of that goes on. It's crazy. So, yeah, men, I think, have to work with each other. Because the women are like, you guys figure it out. Like, if you can meet us on some higher level, well, we'll be there. But we're not going to put up with this crap anymore, I think is where a lot of women are getting to.
And I think one thing is to blame the men or call out men on their behaviors that lead to more relationship breakups or divorces. And another thing is also that I feel women don't want to hear is the task or the obligation that a mother has when she's raising a son. And I see a tendency to discard their role or their responsibility in how they are actually raising the men. I had a very interesting conversation with someone in kindergarten when my son was really small. It was a male teacher, and we were having a conversation about how mothers are raising sons. And he said they are raising sons in a way that they would never want to date.
That could be, I don't know.
That was very interesting to me to think about, because I see a lot of that being true. Women tend to raise kids in a way that they would never want to engage themselves in a relationship with them. So they are living out their own traumas or insecurities and trying to project onto the children, so that they are raising children that are not really capable of a future, of a successful future in terms of relationships. And that goes for boys and girls. This is what I'm seeing. They are tending now to raise girls and, oh, you're a queen, you're beautiful, nothing's wrong with you, while they are kind of raising the boys in a way to separate them from the girl and trying to push them in a narrative that now we see as a result, women don't want to have anything to do with it because of their behavior. They are not calling out the boys on certain behavior while they are small, right, because they think it's okay to do it for a boy, right? While they call out the girl much faster on certain things that they do during the early stages of childhood and teen years, right? And so I see this discrepancy between those two, and mothers do not tend to take responsibility for how they should raise, for example, a son, so that he becomes capable of a relationship and not tap into certain mistakes that women just will not put up with nowadays.
Yeah, I don't know anything much about it. I have a son, and he's 26. He's lovely. He's in a long-term relationship with a lovely woman. So I don't know. I don't know if that's the case. I can't really comment on that because I don't know. But I do know that women in relationships do have a tendency to not appreciate men for who they are, and this leads to a lot of problems too. If you've ever heard of the book called The Queen's Code by, I can't remember her name, Allison something or other, she really talks about how women have a tendency to emasculate men, and they can really drive their husbands and partners away. They want men to be like women with penises. They want them to like listen and gossip and do the same kinds of things the way their girlfriends might, but they don't because they're men. So they're not like appreciating men for who they are as men and appreciating like divine masculine qualities and behaving in ways where they actually expect more, where they expect more from the men instead of putting up with less. The men actually thrive more if the women are expecting more and the women are valuing themselves more, and she's calling him up to a higher level of behavior. So women have a big role to play as well, and it's not fair to just blame it all on the men. It's not. So there's a lot of healing that needs to be done between men and women, big time.
And I think another misconception is also to assume that men will lead in a relationship, because the courtship or the idea of courtship is that the man leads the way because he is interested in her, or at least he should be hunting for her, or however you want to call it. But I think the reality is that women are better leaders or are doing it differently. And so you also mention in your work self-leadership. Maybe we should talk about that part, because I think it's important, because women dismiss this idea, and I see that in a lot of American women. Also in the Asian world, I also see this big tendency of letting the man lead in all aspects of life and dismissing their own power of self-leadership and leadership in terms of the relationship.
Yeah, I read this stuff all the time. I see it on social media about the man leads, and I'm like, why do you? I just think it's silly. It's. Do you want to have your actual relationship to be that the man leads everything? No, are you kidding me? Shouldn't it just be like two people, like working together, like based on their preferences and needs and limitations and what people enjoy, and having like a mutual decision-making process where both people are on equal footing? Like, I find it I don't get it. I don't get it. I go, what is this? Like, oh, you have to be in your feminine energy. It's like, I guess, okay. Like, I can be a feminine woman. Being a very masculine woman most of my life, because I was a breadwinner in my marriage, right? And I have had my own business for 28 years and had to make my own way in a lot of different ways. So I go, well, I guess that makes me really unappealing, maybe. I don't know. I don't care. It's just I have to do what I need to do to survive. And I just think that men and women, like, why not work together? Why not it's like, well, based on like strengths and weaknesses. Who would be stronger at leading on a certain kind of thing, and who would be stronger at leading on another kind of thing? Maybe you're co-leaders, for God's sakes. What's wrong with that? And that those roles can shift. And if you're relying on a man pursuing you all the time, like I know it's a dating maxim, never call, never text, and I've done that thing before too. Don't call them, don't text them, because I get that in early dating, especially because men are opportunistic, and if you're coming after him, he'll be like, sure, oh yeah, and if you're gonna sleep with me, like, bonus. That doesn't mean they like you. Men don't care. Like, I mean, yes, they can fall in love and sex becomes meaningful, but if you're just going to like walk into their hand, they'll be like, yeah, man, oh, right. They don't care. So if he's not pursuing you on the front end, you don't know for sure if he actually likes you. Right? You just don't know. He could just be like, sure, here she is. Perfect. But if it's all about the man's pursuit, some men, that's what they're looking for, is they just want to prove that they can pursue and get. And once they've got you, they don't care anymore, and they're on to the next. Then they dump you and move on to the next pursuit, because they're addicted to the pursuit and the successful capture. And then they're done. So I think that you want to like do a little back and forth. It's okay to reach out, but you don't want to be like just showing up at his doorstep with the bottle of wine and the pizza. Hey, here I am for Netflix and chill. No. He's like, sure, baby. Right?
They will, of course, not say no to such an opportunity.
Why would they? Why would they? Yeah. Yeah, because they're not the same. They're not wired the same as we are that way.
And they have less opportunity, I heard, in one interesting podcast that to get a partner or to get into an intimate relationship with a woman, they have much less opportunity than women in general. So of course they will take every opportunity that comes their way to use it for, I don't know what, practice. That's, I feel, most of the time the driving forces, right? To just have experience, because that is also celebrated in men, right? The more experience he has, the better he is perceived as being a man, right? If you never had one, you're a virgin, like people will laugh at you, especially if you are 40 years old.
40-year-old virgin, yep.
It's not the same that we see women, right, being a virgin with 40. It's also kind of weird, but it's not as bad as we would see it in men.
And they don't get shamed for their number, like their body count, the way women will get shamed for their body count if it's over whatever. I don't know what the socially accepted number is these days, but I don't know. Why do men have less opportunity? Because there's more women than there are men. Is it just that women are more hopefully discerning?
I think it's nature of things.
Oh, I know what it is. It's the 666 thing, and I understand why men are pissed off about that. It's like the woman who's like, they all like, oh, he has to be over 6 feet, 6 figures, 6 inches, that whole thing. And it's like, well, if we could, like, he doesn't need to make 6 figures because you can make your own money. And he, like, why the 6 foot tall thing? Like, that narrows your range very small. So then they say that, like, there's this very small kind of range of men who are getting the dates, and then the rest aren't. And then women wonder why there's not much choice and why they, it's just kind of, it's so superficial, right? It's like, how about we look at someone's heart and how, if they make you laugh and if they're kind and respectful and all those kind of things. Who cares how tall he is as long as he's not like half a head shorter or shorter, right? Like, there's some things that are going to play into attraction, right? But the 6 foot thing, I think, is ridiculous.
On the other hand, I see also two tendencies in women just in general. There is one bucket of women that says, just like you described, let's look at the personality, at the heart, how he acts, what kind of character he has or personality. And then there's the other one that says, no, what really counts is that he's a provider, that he brings enough money in so that I am taken care of because I'm a queen, And I see both kind of in danger, because and I was this one for a majority of my life, to just look at who he is, right? Not really look at the financials, because I always felt very masculine in my energy. I always knew I can do it all myself, and which was a big mistake, I would say now. I would always try to seek the middle, because a man who just shows up as someone who is good and has a good character, makes you laugh and has a good heart and takes care of animals and all that good stuff, right? It's not enough if you want to build a successful relationship, not to mention a marriage or build a family, because a man needs to also show some financial responsibility. He needs to be financially literate, at least as high as you are yourself, if not higher, because the moment you have children, you as a woman, you cannot function. As you said in the beginning, that also goes for when we have children. Our whole brain rewires completely differently to be able to take care of the children. So most of the time, we should not go to work when we have children under the age of 3. It's my personal opinion. If you want your child to be healthy, a healthy adult without trauma in any way, and to be capable of dealing with a lot of stress in life, which will ultimately come, you need to take care of your child and not put it in kindergarten, that we nowadays see women put them just with 3 months. Now you can put a child into kindergarten, which is insane.
In the States, that's terrible. In the States, they have less than 3 months, I think, of maternity leave. In Canada, we have a year, but it depends. Like, I was always self-employed. So when I had my kids, my husband was the primary caregiver. I worked at home, but I also was back in my office 4 days after giving birth both times. Not full time, obviously. Like, and I would be doing things like, I was a writer and a consultant, so I would be doing things like interviews while breastfeeding. I'd be like chasing the kids in the yard with a headset doing media pitches. I'd be changing diapers, talking to clients. Like, That was just how it was. I just had a headset, ran around. So it was pretty crazy though, and it really drove my levels of like stress pretty high. I never had a break. I never had a vacation. I never had a maternity leave for like 20 years or something, right? So, but I'm super resilient, so that's how I got through that.
Same here. I can completely relate being a single mom of two, running multiple businesses because I had no partner that could potentially take care of the financial side so that I could focus on my kids. And because I know this now, because I've went through this, it's not a celebration to be a single mom.
No.
If you are, there's no shaming also. Not at all. But I think women need to find the middle in terms of what they're looking in a partner, because they will run either into this direction, very romantic, or into this direction, which is very emotionless, right? You go without any kind of emotions into a relationship. This is a business transaction, which can sometimes lead to love if you find the right one.
That was what marriage always used to be. Marriage used to be a political and business transaction, right? And that's, so we're trying to reshape it to be something different in today's society. But some people are going back to those old models. I find it kind of interesting, this whole masculine, feminine energy conversation, and it's tiring. We're making things more complicated than they need to be. You know? Putting a lot of stories in people's heads about how things have to be.
Yeah, and not actually focusing on how things actually are or how people actually are. But these are quite ideal ideas and thoughts that people try to make people believe. And I understand what you mean by it makes it more complicated, because it puts a lot of stress also on each one, both men and women, to reach this ideal, right, that you have put into your head.
And like, what if you're just something else works for you and your partner, right? It could be something that doesn't look like what they say on social media. Whatever, who cares what they say?
And this is also a thing that I see in women. They are confused, or they don't know when is the right time to get divorced, for example, or to leave a relationship. They oftentimes, as you said in the beginning, if you know you have tried everything, then you can leave. But how do you know when you have tried everything? And this is where the raising of girls comes in. How you have been raised as a girl will determine how much you will try before you leave. If you have been raised in a lot of trauma and your childhood has been filled with,
you'll hang on,
yes,
you'll hang on, and
you
hang
will
on,
never
and hang
feel
on.
that you've done enough, right? And you will say, I can do more. You will always say you can do more.
Oh yeah, women do this, and especially if there's a trauma bond at play in the relationship, it's like, how much more can I bend over backwards and turn myself inside out to try to make this work, to try to make it work, because it was good for a week before the next blowout, and then it got better again for another week. So maybe, but they're addicted. They're into that cycle of the intermittent reward that addicts them the same way that a slot machine. Intermittent reward, right?
If they believe that they are, or they have to justify a certain belief that they have about themselves, that they are good wives or that they are good women, then they will force themselves even more to try more, to do more, to give more, because they want to live up to that idea that I'm a good woman. I will never leave you. I will do whatever it takes to rescue this relationship, no matter how much you trample on me. Right. And I think this is very unhealthy. And
it is. And the number of times, like, women will, they'll just let their standards go down and down and down and get into this. If I had like $100 for every time I heard a woman say, well, at least he doesn't beat me. I'd have I could take some nice trips, because it's like, can we have the bar on the floor? How low does the bar need to be to decide to leave, and if this relationship is meeting the needs? And so a lot of women will tolerate enormous amounts of verbal abuse and emotional abuse, and sometimes that emotional abuse, the subtle manipulations, are more long-term harmful than if you were getting physically abused. They'll tolerate a lot. And especially, it's like you've no doubt heard the analogy about, if you try to put a frog in a pot of boiling water, it will jump right out. But if you put the frog in cold water and then slowly turn up the heat, the frog will stay because they're adapting until they're boiled and dead, right? And that is what happens in relationships. And I'm not saying that men don't also end up in these situations in abusive relationships as well, because they do. It's just a little less common for certainly physical abuse, but women can be very emotionally manipulative and abusive as well. So they can end up pretty messed up too. So, and trying really hard and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know who's more likely to end it, but certainly women are filing a lot more. Women are initiating a lot more divorce. Can't remember, it varies by country, but 75% or something like that.
Would you say that women over 40 have different or more challenges during a divorce or after a divorce than younger women with children or without children? What's your experience here?
Well, I tend to work more with the older women. That's because that's my age group, and I feel that there's special challenges. Like I wouldn't say it's necessarily harder or easier, it's different. So if you're over 50, say, you could be dealing with not just the divorce, but menopause, empty nest, and pending retirement. You could be and maybe growing health issues. So you have like a perfect storm situation going on in terms of the stressors in your life. Younger women with children are going to they're having all like their career development, if they have a career, or they don't have, if they've been a stay-at-home mother, they've got maybe real bigger financial problems, and they've got this problem of childcare, right? And then there's the custody arrangements, and there's things like parental alienation, and if there's one of the parents is narcissistic and they are trying to turn the kids against the parent, that happens all the time. It's crazy, and they can be really struggling with what's going on at the other parent's house, completely undermining what they're doing. Like, it's not even, they talk about co-parenting with your ex, but when it's a person, like when that person has a personality disorder, we call it counter-parenting. They're counter-parenting. They're actually working against you, and it's pretty bad. That kind of thing can happen. So those women are extremely stressed, and their kids are being badly affected. So I couldn't say if one was easier or harder than the other. There's a lot of variation, but you see the different characterization. And they may be more feeling the need for a new man or something, because they might be looking for a stepfather for their children, but they're trying to date with children and all of that stuff, right?
I can imagine that women in their 40s and 50s are filing for divorce more than younger women, especially when they have kids, because they think, oh, we need a perfect family picture, so to speak. And they will less likely file for divorce. They will more likely stay to try still to repair everything and do more. And
yeah, I think that's possible. I don't have any evidence about that. I haven't read that, but it intuitively makes sense. I know that I was in that place. It's like trying to keep the family together. Even when you shouldn't. So there's a strong social injunction to keep the family together, and the pressure of trying to do it on your own with kids is tremendous. Yeah, the pressure is huge of what that's going to take to separate with young kids. But a lot of people do it. They just do. And it's actually smarter if the relationship is high conflict or abusive. Well, you got to get out, because it's not doing the kids any good to be in that toxic environment, not one bit. That whole idea of staying together for the kids is just a terrible idea.
On the other hand, a lot of talk, especially on social media, is being done towards, for example, single mothers who will be blamed for the situation of the kids, that they will turn out worse than having a man around, even if he's just present, right? The presence of the man will save the kids, so to speak. And this is...
Depends on what the man's presence entails and what he's teaching his kids.
The amount of pressure that is being put just in general on both men and women for different reasons to get into a marriage just in general is artificial. in my view, because that has been created, the marriage has been created not for our benefit, but for the benefit of the church and the state and what have you. It's not really a benefit for you, because based on a study I read recently, the happiest people are single women without kids and married men. So this whole arrangement cannot be for the benefit of both. And it rarely works, as we can see on the divorce rates that we have nowadays, that of course are influenced by certain aspects, but just in general, this concept of marriage does not seem to work. And I think we will see a big break up from this idea just in general, both in good and bad terms.
Probably, yeah. I'm a real, oddly, funnily being, even though I'm a divorce coach, I'm also a real romantic, and I really love marriage. Like I think it's a wonderful thing with the right partners. It doesn't, but you don't have to be married to have an amazing relationship. But I love weddings, and I love the idea of the vow, and I love all that, and and my parents were married for 65 years. Up until my father died, and of course, they had some challenging years, but honestly, they also had great years. And I just kind of think, wow, what an amazing thing to have for your entire life, like this person who's been your partner your whole entire life. And I feel sad. I feel sad for people the way things are going. I don't completely understand all aspects of it. Obviously, it's a mash. We're going through massive social changes. But also, people do. I think a lot of it has to do with capacity for growth. If you have two partners who both have capacity for growth, and they're growing on similar or at least parallel tracks, that's going to work. But if you have one partner who doesn't want to have any interest in growth at all, and you have someone who wants to grow, or you have people who are growing in divergent directions, it's just not going to work. And that has to be okay. Ultimately, the most important person and the only person that we have to be in alignment with is ourselves. We have to be in alignment with ourselves. And if being in a relationship is taking you off of your own needs, boundaries, your requirements to be the person that you came here to be, and you're being taken out of alignment, things aren't going to go well for you. It's not a healthy relationship anymore. And to say that we are only intended to have one partner for our entire life is probably not true. Like if you ever read The Seed of the Soul, I'm trying to remember Gary, I can't remember his last name, but he talks about how like we have several like key relationships that we'll have in our life. A lot of people talk about the 3 relationship theory, which you may have heard of, like your first love, which, you have kids with that person and it falls down at some point in time. And then there's another one, which could be like like maybe that more traumatizing one. And then your third one, like that's like the one that takes you out the end, right? So that's, who knows if that's true or not, but it's a pattern. At least it's a pattern it's been noted. It's a pattern that's been observed. I wouldn't call it a maxim or anything. Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, it is. And so there's still hope for me. I've had the two. I've had two. So, and who knows, right? But I'm trying to lean into being single now at this point in my life. Yeah. For the first time, actually, I got married when I was 23. A man that I met right when I turned 18. And I was with him just until I was just like very close up to my 50th birthday. That's a long relationship. And then I was with another man more recently for 5.5 years. And but that wasn't like we were misaligned, some incompatibilities, shall we say. So now I'm just kind of going, okay, this is the first time in my life, because my kids are grown up now. It's the first time in my life where I'm actually trying to feel what it feels like in my own energy. Individuating from relationships to say, what are my preferences? What are my needs? What's my vibe when I'm not like trying to fit myself into someone else's like requirements, expectations, or desires? I'm just following my own inclinations. Who am I? Just me. And then from that point, then I can start to see who would be in alignment with me, who I really am. right? Because the first relationship was all about societal expectations. You go to school, you grow up, you go to school, you get married, you have kids, right? Like it was just totally, and then we have to add the next step, which is you get divorced, and right? Like that seems to be the way it is now. And so you do all that, and then you get divorced. And then the next one was more like, okay, I have all this trauma from my marriage. How can I go and explore that trauma in a relationship that's healing but also traumatizing? And then now the third one, but it was like so much based on who, like my marriage had a big influence on how that relationship went. And it shouldn't have, but I didn't have all the healing work done. So now it's like, yeah, well, who am I? So, and that's what I think is that's what men and women have to be figuring out. Who am I when I don't have those roles? If I just take away that wife, take away that mother, take away, whatever other roles have been assigned or taken on, who am I? What do I want? And what's my contribution? What's my purpose?
I think a lot of women are feeling that they are in that phase right now, getting out of a marriage or a relationship. In that age gap particularly is my observation, that they now give themselves a little bit of time, because before that they felt the pressure of meeting expectations, meeting appointments even, right? When you have to deliver your kids to school and what have you, all the expectations that you have, it's very intense. And I wonder how we, or people that do that type of work like you do, can help women in their early stages of marriage to actually accommodate their own needs within a relationship, to then operate from a very calm, sophisticated, and graceful way, to have that high level of stress tolerance without allowing anyone to trample on their boundaries.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And so much of what you were just saying, of course, nervous system regulation just jumps right out at me. Like people and men too, right? We need to have regulated nervous systems to be able to be in relationship successfully and not be triggering each other all the time. And it's a stereotype, but men may be more likely to lose their temper. Maybe not sure. I think women have maybe a bit more patience than men, with the children too, especially. Developing that patience, that grounded energy that's going to provide a really safe place for your children to be raised. And actually you can teach your children how to regulate their nervous systems. So, I'm an EFT practitioner, right? Like emotional freedom techniques, like tapping, breath work, there's eye movement work. Like there's so many different things that you can do to basically build that zone of tolerance in each person. So guess what? Then it's also the tolerance for your partner and their foibles. So you can actually be more gracious and unconditional and accepting for your partner, right? Because you have a higher capacity in your nervous system to tolerate things that may fall out of the ordinary for you. And you can handle it. I think that I've gotten through the stress that I've had in my life, which has been quite intense, because I got involved in yoga years ago, like 30 years ago. I got involved in yoga and I became a yoga teacher in the mid-90s. And for all the years that I was raising my children, I was on the mat. As soon as they were off on the school bus, I was on my mat for an hour and a half. Like, I was a serious yoga practitioner. And that is how I had the zone of tolerance to cope with things like my daughter's friend killing herself and all kinds of, like my brother dying of H1N1, and my husband had cancer. We broke up. My daughter had anorexia, like many, like almost fatal situation. Some very, very, very intensely traumatizing and stressful things that I have gotten through. And I give the credit to the conditioning of my nervous system through like 20, 25 years of consistent yoga practice as being very foundational. Yeah. You need to have a way that you build capacity in your nervous system to handle what life throws at you, to handle what your partner throws at you without like reacting. People get into these reactivity loops, and so when I'm working with couples, and I do couples work too, that's one of the things I get them to do is to breathe together and to like put a hand on each other's heart, sit across from each other, put a hand on each other's heart, look in each other's eyes, and do deep breathing together to develop connection and calmness, to co-regulate together, right? We are, as humans, we co-regulate with each other's nervous systems. That's what we do. And so children are in training to their parents' level of nervous system activation. So if their parents are, like their mother, say, is in fight or flight all the time because they're married to an abusive man, the kids are going to be in fight or flight all the time. And that wears you down and it brings down your zone of tolerance. Yeah. Yeah, and so you have kids with anxiety, ADHD, so many problems on top of all, like just the world is very anxiety provoking these days. So, yeah. Yeah, I think everyone should do maybe part of marriage classes. Because, you could use, they should be, maybe I'll have to pitch that somewhere, to include EFT in the marriage classes, because if you could sit there and tap and talk to someone while you're tapping, you bring down your nervous system activation, you can hear things that you couldn't normally hear. You can tolerate truths that you would normally reject, and you could say things that you would normally suppress because of the deactivation that it creates in your nervous system when you're tapping. Just like to tap on a collarbone, just below the collarbone when you're having a difficult conversation. Take a moment to attune to each other, understand that you're on the same page. Let's not be enemies, but let's just breathe together and tap together for a few minutes, and then we can talk this through in a more powerful way. And I've helped couples recover from like multi-affairs and all kinds of things using these kind of regulation techniques that have allowed them to hear each other.
Where can people find you to find out more about you and your services and how you can help them?
www.empoweryourpotential.ca. I mean, maybe you put this, you've got show notes or something, is one place they can find me. They can just email me at Melanie Starr. No, just Melanie at melaniestarr.ca, all lowercase, Melanie at melaniestarr.ca. And I have another website that's specific to divorce. It's www.divorcerecoverynow.com.
Beautiful. I will leave every link in the show notes and the description.